The residents at Sunset Manor always wondered why Dorothy never seemed flustered during emergencies, why she always knew when someone was feeling unwell before they said anything, and why the retirement home somehow felt safer when she was working. What they never suspected was that their favorite activities director was still conducting security assessments and threat evaluations every single day. Welcome to True Human Tales. Before we dive into this incredible story of hidden protection and quiet strength, tell me in the comments from which city are you watching this video today. And if you believe these stories of guardians watching over our most vulnerable deserve to be heard, hit that subscribe button, because sometimes the person leading your bingo game is doing much more than organizing activities. Sunset Manor sat on 5 peaceful acres in suburban Phoenix, a modern assisted living facility that had become home to 87 seniors. The building featured comfortable common areas, a well-equipped dining room, and beautiful gardens where residents could enjoy Arizona sunshine while feeling safe and cared. For Dorothy Williams had been the activities director for 8 years, arriving every morning at 7 a.m. to ensure her residents started each day with purpose and joy. She was 72 years old, with silver hair, kind blue eyes, and a gentle demeanor that made everyone feel like they were visiting their favorite grandmother. To the residents who depended on her for entertainment and emotional support, Dorothy was exactly what she appeared to be: a retired teacher who had found her calling caring for seniors, someone who could organize engaging activities and provide patient understanding. But Dorothy Williams was much more than she appeared, and the signs were visible to anyone who understood what to look for. Her daily routines weren't just about organizing activities. There were security patrols that gave her visual contact with every resident and potential access point. Her position during activities provided clear sight lines to all entrances while maintaining protective oversight. When Dorothy led bingo games, she was just calling numbers. She was conducting wellness checks, noting which residents seemed off their normal patterns, and maintaining awareness of everyone who entered the facility. The activity room had been subtly modified. Supply closets contained emergency medical equipment, and Dorothy maintained communication protocols that allowed her to summon help faster than normal procedures. Dorothy knew every resident by their medical histories, family situations, and daily routines. She remembered every visitor and service technician because she had been trained to remember details that might become important. What the people who trusted her with their golden years didn't know was that they were being protected by someone who had spent 25 years in the U.S. Army Special Forces, someone who had conducted rescue operations and protected high-value targets in war zones. Dorothy had been Sergeant Major Dorothy Thompson, one of the first women to serve in Special Forces roles, assigned to protection details for diplomats and civilian populations in war zones. She had operated in places where failure meant death and success meant invisible service. But that was her previous life, a classified existence that she had left behind 5 years ago, when mandatory retirement ended her military career, but not her commitment to protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. The retirement home job had seemed perfect a way to use her protective instincts and organizational skills to serve people who deserved safety, dignity, and respect in their final years. She could provide security without appearing threatening, build relationships without revealing classified training, and ensure that her residents lived without fear. For 8 years, it had worked perfectly. Dorothy had prevented medical emergencies by recognizing symptoms, early had quietly identified elder abuse, and had created security protocols that made Sunset Manor one of the safest facilities in the state. Until the day when 2 armed men decided that a retirement home would be an easy target for robbery, and discovered that their victims were protected by someone who had never stopped being a soldier. Dorothy was leading the Tuesday afternoon craft circle when she first noticed them. 2 men who entered during visiting hours but didn't behave like family members. They moved with purpose that felt wrong too, focused for people visiting elderly relatives. Over 25 years of military service had taught Dorothy to recognize predatory behavior. These men scanned the facility, layout, noted security cameras, and assessed staff numbers, suggesting they weren't there for social reasons. She continued guiding residents through their art project while discreetly observing the suspicious visitors. They were asking questions about facility procedures, medication storage, and whether there were security guards on duty. Dorothy excused herself from the craft circle while actually moving to better assess the threat the men were asking the receptionist about visiting hours, pharmacy locations, and staffing schedules. Sarah, the young receptionist, was answering their questions with the helpful politeness that facility policy required, but Dorothy could see that something about these visitors was making her uncomfortable. They were asking the wrong kinds of questions, showing too much interest in operational details. Dorothy activated the small emergency transmitter she wore as a medical alert device, but which actually connected her to security protocols she had established with local law enforcement control. "This is Dorothy. I have 2 suspicious individuals at Sunset Manor conducting what appears to be reconnaissance for possible criminal activity." The response came through her nearly invisible earpiece. "Dorothy, this is dispatch. Can you provide more details?" 2 adult males asking detailed questions about security procedures and medication storage behavior consistent with robbery planning. Dorothy understood that her concerns might seem paranoid to people who had spent decades in environments where threat assessment meant survival, but her instincts had been developed in places where missing danger signs resulted in body counts. She continued monitoring the visitors while maintaining her normal routine, leading residents back to their rooms, helping with afternoon medications, and ensuring everyone was comfortable. But she was also implementing security measures that none of them would notice. Dorothy began positioning staff and residents away from vulnerable areas, secured medication supplies, and activated emergency protocols that would bring faster law enforcement response if needed. 20 minutes later, the 2 men left after taking what appeared to be casual photographs of the building layout, but Dorothy recognized professional reconnaissance when she saw it. That evening, she conducted investigation using contacts from her military career to run background checks on the vehicle and facial recognition she had captured. The results confirmed her fears. Both men had criminal records involving armed robbery and drug trafficking. They were professionals who targeted assisted living facilities because they assumed such places were defended only by minimum wage security. Dorothy spent that night preparing for what she hoped wouldn't happen, but what her experience told her was inevitable. These men would return, and when they did, they would expect to find easy victims. They would be wrong. Dorothy arrived at Sunset Manor the next morning, 2 hours early, to implement security measures that would protect her residents without causing them alarm or disrupting their routines. She had learned during her military career that the best protection was invisible, protection that worked without creating fear. She began by conducting assessment of the facilities, defensive capabilities, noting sight lines, potential choke points, and emergency exits. Her planning was thorough but discreet, ensuring normal operations could continue. Dorothy also reached out to Phoenix police through unofficial channels, using her military credentials to request increased patrol presence around Sunset Manor. Law enforcement agreed to provide additional coverage based on her service record. The morning, Dorothy maintained her normal activities while positioning herself and staff for rapid response. She briefed the head nurse on modified emergency procedures, explaining them as routine safety updates. Dorothy also made subtle changes to her activity room setup, positioning furniture to provide cover, ensuring emergency supplies were accessible, and creating clear pathways for rapid movement. By noon, she had transformed Sunset Manor from a soft target into a prepared defensive position without a single resident or staff member realizing that anything had changed. The residents continued their normal routines, playing cards, reading books, and enjoying lunch in the dining room, completely unaware that their activities director had spent the morning turning their home into a fortress protected by someone who understood exactly how to stop bad people from hurting good people. Dorothy positioned herself in the main common area where she could observe both the front entrance and the resident areas, while appearing to organize afternoon activities. Her training had taught her that the best defense was preparation, combined with the element of surprise. At 2:30 p.m., her preparation was tested when the same 2 men returned, but this time they weren't conducting reconnaissance. They were armed, and they had come to rob what they thought was a defenseless retirement home. The armed robbery began at 2:47 p.m. during afternoon activities, when the 2 men Dorothy had identified the previous day entered through the main lobby with weapons drawn. and demands that turned a peaceful Tuesday into a crisis that would test everything Dorothy had learned during 25 years of protecting innocent people. "Nobody move," the lead attacker shouted, waving a pistol at the front desk receptionist. "Where are the drugs? Where do you keep the cash? And don't try any alarms or anyone gets hurt." Fear swept through the common areas as residents and staff realized they were facing armed criminals. Several elderly residents began crying, others tried to hide behind furniture, and the nursing staff moved instinctively to shield the most vulnerable patients. But Dorothy didn't panic. She had been in similar situations before, in much more dangerous places with much higher stakes. She was already moving. The attackers had made several critical errors that Dorothy recognized immediately. They had assumed all retirement home staff were civilians, with no tactical training. They had entered during shift change when staffing was at its lowest, and they had positioned themselves where they could be isolated from potential hostages. Dorothy activated her emergency beacon while appearing to comfort frightened residents. "Control, this is Dorothy. We have armed robbery in progress at Sunset Manor. 2 subjects with weapons, approximately 30 civilians at risk. Requesting immediate tactical response. Dorothy, evacuate residents and wait for law enforcement. Do not engage." Dorothy understood the order, but she also understood something her handlers didn't. These weren't professional robbers conducting a quick smash-and-grab operation. These were desperate criminals who had chosen elderly victims because they expected no resistance. The lead attacker was already threatening residents, demanding to know where medications were stored, while his partner was rifling through the front desk, looking for cash and keys to secure areas. Dorothy recognized the escalation pattern from her military experience. They were becoming more agitated and would start hurting people to speed up the process. She made a decision that would either save lives or end her career. She was going to protect her residents. Dorothy moved through Sunset Manor like the special forces operator she had always been, using the facility's layout to her advantage, while the attackers focused on terrorizing staff and residents. She positioned herself for maximum tactical effectiveness. The first attacker was threatening the head nurse near the medication station, demanding keys to pharmaceutical storage, while using his weapon to intimidate an 80-year-old woman with Alzheimer's. Dorothy approached from his blind spot, using her intimate knowledge of the building layout to remain undetected. She struck with precision, developed through decades of close quarters combat training, disarming him with techniques that rendered him unconscious before he could alert his partner. The weapon was secured, the threat was neutralized, and 1/2 of the danger was eliminated without any residents being harmed. The second attacker realized something was wrong when his partner stopped responding to his calls. He began moving through the facility, searching for threats while using terrified residents as human shields. Dorothy had anticipated this response. She used the retirement home's design to her advantage, creating distractions that drew the attacker away from vulnerable residents, then engaging him in an area where no innocent people could be caught in crossfire. The confrontation was swift and decisive. Dorothy had spent her career learning how to end threats quickly and efficiently. The second attacker found himself disarmed, restrained, and waiting for law enforcement arrival before he fully understood what had happened. The entire engagement lasted less than 3 minutes. 2 armed criminals neutralized 30 residents and staff members safe, and a retirement home that had been targeted for its perceived weakness, defended by someone who had made protecting innocence her life's work. When Phoenix police arrived, they found a situation unlike anything they had expected. 2 suspects secured and cooperative, 30 elderly residents safe and unharmed, and an activities director who had just prevented what could have been a tragic assault on some of society's most vulnerable members. The investigation that followed revealed every detail about Dorothy Williams' background that she had kept carefully hidden for 8 years. Sergeant Major Dorothy Thompson, 25 years, U.S. Army Special Forces veteran of classified operations that remained officially secret even decades after their completion. Detective James Crawford, who led the response, found himself interviewing a woman who had single-handedly stopped an armed robbery while organizing afternoon bingo. "Dorothy, why didn't you wait for backup?" Detective Crawford asked, while reviewing military service records that documented someone who had been among the most elite soldiers in American history, because they weren't planning to take what they wanted and leave peacefully. Dorothy replied with quiet authority, They were planning to hurt my residents to speed up the process. I recognized the behavioral pattern from experience with similar situations. The detective studied her personnel file, which included commendations for actions in classified theaters, operations that officially never happened, and training that most people couldn't imagine why retirement home work. Because these people deserve to feel safe in their final years. Dorothy said they raised families, built communities, served their country, and now they're vulnerable to people who see them as easy targets. Someone needs to watch over them. The residents who had depended on Dorothy for activities and companionship were learning that their gentle activities, Director had been a highly decorated Special Forces veteran, that the woman who helped them with crafts and remembered their grandchildren's names had been protecting them from dangers they never knew existed. Mr. Peterson, who had served in Vietnam and always suspected there was more to Dorothy than met the eye, said it perfectly. She was always our guardian angel. We just didn't know she had the training to back it up. 6 months later, Dorothy still works at Sunset Manor, still arrives at 7 a.m., still leads bingo games and craft activities, and still makes sure every resident feels loved and valued. But now there's a small plaque in the main lobby placed there by grateful families, in appreciation of Dorothy Williams, whose courage and dedication proved that heroes come in all ages and our elders deserve the very best protection. Dorothy tried to have it removed, but the families refused. They wanted everyone to know that their loved ones were cared for by someone who had dedicated her life to protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. The tactical equipment stays in her supply closets, because Dorothy understands that retirement from active duty doesn't mean retirement from the responsibility to protect innocent people. It just means finding new ways to serve. Sometimes the most important battles happen in retirement homes, sometimes your activities. Director is conducting threat assessments while teaching watercolor painting. Sometimes a warrior trades her uniform for a craft apron, but never stops standing guard. Dorothy Williams found her perfect post-military assignment protector of people who had earned the right to live their final years in safety, dignity, and peace, exactly the kind of service that gives meaning to sacrifice. Have you ever met someone who seemed like a gentle caregiver until circumstances revealed their incredible strength? Share their story in the comments. Because heroes are everywhere, usually teaching bingo instead of making headlines. Subscribe to True Human Tales. For more tales of hidden protectors, quiet guardians, and everyday heroes who watch over our most vulnerable citizens with courage that never retires. Because sometimes the most important duty is making sure grandparents feel safe, and sometimes the greatest honor is being trusted to protect those who once protected us.